For nearly 3,000 years, the story of the Trojan War has captivated audiences across nearly every culture that has ever encountered it. A stolen queen, a 10-year siege, a wooden horse, and a cast of legendary warriors, Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon, Priam, all brought to life through Homer's ancient epic poems. It is one of the most enduring stories ever told. But here is something worth stating clearly and honestly before we go any further. No scientist has ever recovered DNA from Achilles, from Agamemnon, or from any other figure named in Homer's account. These men and women exist within poetry composed centuries after the events they describe supposedly took place, and no burial, no skeleton, no genetic sample has ever been confirmed to belong to any of them. What genetic science has actually uncovered is something different, and in many ways, something even more remarkable. Real ancient DNA, recovered from real royal burials, belonging to the actual Bronze Age Greek civilization that gave birth to the entire Trojan War legend in the first place. This is the true family behind the Age of Heroes, the flesh and blood dynasty whose world eventually inspired the legend, uncovered not through myth or poetry, but through careful, patient genetic science conducted on bones that have rested underground for well over 3,000 years. Let's start with understanding exactly who these people actually were, because their civilization is every bit as fascinating as the legend that eventually grew up around it. Between roughly 1700 and 1100 years before the Common Era, a powerful, wealthy civilization flourished across mainland Greece. Historians and archaeologists refer to this civilization as Mycenaean Greece, named after its most famous and most thoroughly excavated stronghold, the ancient city of Mycenae, in the northeastern Peloponnese. This was a civilization built around massive stone fortresses, elaborate palace complexes, and richly furnished royal tombs, a civilization sophisticated enough to develop its own writing system, engage in long-distance trade across the entire Mediterranean, and maintain powerful warrior aristocracies who ruled over surrounding farmland and smaller settlements. It was precisely this Mycenaean world, scholars widely agree, that later gave rise to the legends eventually recorded by Homer centuries afterward. When Homer describes King Agamemnon ruling from golden Mycenae and leading a great Greek coalition against Troy, he was drawing upon a real, historically documented civilization, even if the specific individuals and events he describes cannot be independently verified as historical fact. Mycenaean Greece was real, its palaces were real, its warrior elite were real. The war against Troy, or against something resembling it, may well have some kernel of historical truth buried somewhere within it. But the specific characters Homer names and the specific family drama he describes belong to poetry and legend, not to any confirmed historical record. In 1876, a wealthy German businessman turned amateur archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann began excavating at Mycenae, having already gained international fame and no small amount of controversy for his earlier excavations at the site believed to be ancient Troy itself. At Mycenae, Schliemann uncovered a remarkable set of royal burial shafts, later named Grave Circle A, containing spectacular quantities of gold jewelry, ornate ceremonial weapons, and strikingly crafted golden funeral masks placed directly over the faces of several buried men. Overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of what he had found, Schliemann sent a now famous telegram to the king of Greece declaring that he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon himself. It was a thrilling claim, and it captured global attention immediately. It was also, as later archaeological and chronological research eventually confirmed, almost certainly incorrect. The golden masks and royal burials Schliemann discovered at Grave Circle A actually date to several centuries before the Trojan War is traditionally believed to have taken place, meaning these individuals, whoever they truly were, could not possibly have been Agamemnon or any of his contemporaries described within Homer's poetry. And yet, the masks and their long-departed occupants remained anonymous for nearly a century and a half afterward, their true identities and family relationships completely unknown, until modern ancient DNA research finally arrived to answer questions Schliemann's excavation alone could never fully resolve. Schliemann's Grave Circle A was not the only royal burial complex discovered at Mycenae. In 1952, decades after Schliemann's original excavation, Greek archaeologists uncovered a second, somewhat older set of shaft graves nearby, now known as Grave Circle B. Together, these two burial complexes span several generations of Mycenaean royal history, offering researchers a rare opportunity to trace how this particular ruling dynasty's wealth, power, and family structure evolved over an extended period of time, rather than examining just a single frozen moment. Sight could have provided on its own, tracing biological relationships not just within a single generation, but potentially across several generations of the same ruling family as Mycenaean civilization grew steadily in wealth and influence throughout the centuries. That breakthrough moment arrived in 2017, when an international team of geneticists successfully extracted and analyzed ancient DNA recovered from Bronze Age skeletal remains across Greece, including individuals connected to this Mycenaean royal lineage. Published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, this research represented the first genuine genetic window into the actual population that built Mycenaean civilization, the real flesh and blood people whose world eventually inspired centuries of legend, poetry, and eventually Homer's enduring epics. The first major finding to emerge from this research addressed a question scholars had debated for well over a century. Where did the Mycenaean people actually come from, genetically speaking? Some earlier theories had proposed the Mycenaeans were relatively recent arrivals to mainland Greece, invaders who had swept in from entirely foreign regions and imposed their rule over the existing population. The genetic evidence told a considerably different, and in many ways more interesting story. Mycenaean ancestry showed strong genetic continuity with earlier Bronze Age populations, already living across mainland connected to migrations moving through the wider Eurasian steppe region over the preceding centuries. In other words, Mycenaean civilization was not primarily built by foreign conquerors sweeping in from elsewhere. It emerged largely from populations already rooted in the Greek mainland, gradually absorbing new genetic and cultural influences from neighboring regions over an extended period of time. This same research also revealed something genuinely fascinating regarding the close genetic relationship between Mycenaean Greeks and their neighbors across the Aegean Sea. The Minoan civilization centered on the island of Crete. Genetic analysis showed that Mycenaeans and Minoans were, in fact, closely related populations, sharing the majority of their genetic ancestry, despite representing two distinct cultures with their own separate languages, religious practices, and artistic traditions. This finding helped resolve a long-running scholarly debate regarding exactly how these two influential Bronze Age Aegean civilizations related to one another, confirming they emerged from deeply connected, genetically similar founding populations, even as their cultures developed along distinctly separate paths over subsequent centuries. If you find it fascinating how ancient DNA can quietly resolve century-old archaeological debates like this one, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep bringing you carefully researched deep dives exactly like this one. Now let's turn to, perhaps, the single most remarkable discovery to emerge from this genetic research, because it involves the very royal graves Schliemann first excavated back in 1876, the same golden burials he once mistakenly believed belonged to Agamemnon himself. Researchers successfully extracted usable ancient DNA from several individuals buried within these elaborate royal shaft graves, allowing scientists, for the first time in nearly a century and a half since their initial discovery, to actually determine how these buried individuals were related to one another. The results confirmed something archaeologists had long suspected simply based on the shared elaborate burial customs and physical proximity of these graves, but had never been able to definitively prove. Several of the men buried within these royal shafts were, in fact, close biological relatives. Genetic analysis identified specific individuals as uncle and nephew, confirming these were not simply wealthy, powerful individuals who happened to be buried near one another by coincidence or political alliance, but members of an actual ruling family dynasty, bound together through direct blood relation, and buried according to careful, deliberate family tradition across multiple generations. Think about what that discovery actually means. For nearly 150 years, these golden funeral masks remained silent. Anonymous faces, their true identities and family connections, completely unknown despite their obvious wealth and status. Ancient DNA finally gave researchers a genuine answer that pure archaeology alone had never been able to fully provide. This was not simply a random collection of powerful individuals. This was a real family, a genuine ruling dynasty, whose members were carefully, deliberately buried together across successive generations. Precisely the kind of powerful, interconnected warrior aristocracy that Homer's later poetry would eventually draw upon when constructing his legendary account of kings like Agamemnon ruling from golden Mycenae. This is precisely the layer of nuance worth sitting with carefully. Homer's Agamemnon is not confirmed to be any specific individual found within these graves. The dating, as mentioned earlier, does not line up with the traditional chronology of the Trojan War. But the genuine social and political world Homer describes, powerful family dynasties ruling from golden citadels, warrior aristocracies bound together through blood relation and inherited authority, passing down power, wealth, and status across multiple generations. This reflects something genuinely real, now directly confirmed through modern genetic science. The poetry may be legend. The underlying society that inspired it was authentic, and we now have genetic proof of exactly how its ruling families were structured. This finding adds genuine complexity to how we should think about gender and authority within the broader Mycenaean world. a nuance that Homer's later poetry, composed centuries afterward within a very different cultural and political context, does not always fully capture or accurately reflect. Real Mycenaean royal women, based on the archaeological and genetic evidence recovered directly from their own burials, appear to have held considerably more visible power, wealth, and status than the more limited roles typically assigned to female characters within Homer's later epic tradition. It's worth pausing here to explain exactly how researchers managed to extract usable genetic material from bones that had rested underground for well over 3,000 years, since the process itself is a remarkable scientific achievement in its own right. Ancient DNA degrades steadily over time, breaking down into increasingly small, damaged fragments in the warm Mediterranean climate surrounding Greece makes this degradation considerably worse than it would be in colder northern regions, where genetic material tends to survive in far better condition. For decades, many geneticists assumed usable ancient DNA simply could not be recovered from Bronze Age Greek remains at all, given how thoroughly these warm conditions typically destroy genetic material over such an enormous span of time. It took considerably refined laboratory extraction techniques, developed and steadily improved throughout the 2010s, specifically targeting the dense petrous bone located at the base of the skull, where genetic material tends to survive considerably longer than in other skeletal locations, before researchers finally succeeded in recovering enough intact genetic material from these ancient Greek remains to conduct a meaningful analysis. This same research also drew upon an important piece of historical context that helped confirm Mycenaean identity beyond simple genetics alone. In 1952, a young British architect and self-taught linguist named Michael Ventris successfully deciphered Linear B, an ancient script found inscribed on clay tablets across multiple Mycenaean palace sites. Ventris's decipherment revealed, to considerable scholarly astonishment, that this script recorded an early form of the Greek language itself, confirming definitively that Mycenaean civilization was genuinely Greek-speaking centuries before the golden age of classical Greece that most people typically picture when imagining ancient Greek civilization. This linguistic confirmation, combined decades later with genetic evidence from these same royal burial sites, has allowed modern researchers to build an unusually complete, multi-layered picture of exactly who the Mycenaeans were, spanning their language, their genetic ancestry, and their family structures all at once, a level of combined historical certainty that would have seemed entirely unimaginable to Schliemann himself back in 1876. There's another genuinely significant discovery from this same body of research worth examining carefully, because it reveals something important about power and gender within Mycenaean society more broadly. Several of the most elaborately furnished burials within these royal shaft graves, tombs containing extraordinary quantities of gold jewelry, ornate weaponry, and precious imported goods, belonged not to men, but to women. Genetic and archaeological analysis together suggest these women held considerable status and influence within Mycenaean royal society, quite possibly serving essential roles in cementing political alliances between powerful families through strategic marriage or wielding independent authority and wealth entirely in their own right, rather than existing purely as secondary figures within a strictly male-dominated warrior aristocracy. Real Mycenaean royal women, based on the archaeological and genetic evidence recovered directly from their own burials, appear to have held considerably more visible power, wealth, and status than the more limited roles typically assigned to female characters within Homer's later epic tradition. If uncovering these kinds of genuine historical threads, hidden quietly beneath centuries of legend and poetry, fascinates you the way it fascinates me, make sure you're subscribed, because there are many more carefully researched deep dives just like this one still waiting to be explored right here on this channel. Let's also address directly the question everyone watching this video likely still has in mind. What about Troy itself? What about the war that supposedly started this entire legendary chain of events? Archaeological excavations at Hisarlik, a site in modern-day Turkey believed by the overwhelming majority of scholars to be the location of ancient Troy, have revealed clear evidence of a fortified Bronze Age settlement, one that suffered significant destruction through fire and conflict at various points throughout its long history. One particular destruction layer, conventionally labeled Troy 7A by archaeologists, dates to roughly the correct general time frame traditionally associated with the legendary Trojan War, and shows genuine evidence of violent destruction consistent with warfare. However, and this distinction matters enormously for anyone genuinely interested in separating documented history from enduring legend, this archaeological evidence confirms only that a violent conflict of some kind likely occurred at this specific location during this general period. It does not confirm the specific 10-year siege Homer describes. It does not confirm a stolen queen named Helen. It does not confirm named individual warriors like Achilles or Hector ever existed as specific historical people. What it suggests, most probably, is that Homer's epic poetry likely drew upon a genuine kernel of historical memory, perhaps a real conflict, or more likely, several separate conflicts across different periods gradually blended together. Through centuries of oral storytelling tradition, eventually reshaped, dramatized, and personalized into the specific characters and events we recognize today from Homer's surviving poems. This represents exactly how oral historical tradition tends to function across many different cultures throughout human history. A genuine historical kernel, a real war, a real destroyed city, a real ruling dynasty, gradually becomes reshaped and elaborated across many generations of storytelling, eventually acquiring named individual heroes, dramatic personal motivations, and specific memorable plot details that may have limited connection, if any at all, to whatever specific individuals actually lived and fought during the actual historical events being commemorated. So when we ask what ancient DNA has genuinely revealed about the real family behind the age of the Trojan War, here is the honest, scientifically grounded answer. It has not identified Agamemnon, Helen, Priam, or any other specific character named within Homer's poetry. What it has done, and this is no small achievement, is provide direct, physical, genetic confirmation of the actual ruling dynasty that governed Mycenaean Greece during this broader historical period. A real family, connected through confirmed blood relation across multiple generations, buried together in a manner reflecting genuine inherited power, wealth, and status. This is the authentic family whose real world, real palace, and real warrior culture eventually inspired the legendary figures we still recognize today. There is something genuinely valuable and genuinely humbling in understanding this distinction carefully. It would certainly make for a more sensational headline to claim scientists have identified Agamemnon's actual DNA or confirmed Helen of Troy as a specific historical individual. But real science, conducted carefully and honestly, rarely hands us tidy confirmation of beloved legends, exactly as we've always imagined them. Instead, it offers us something considerably more valuable in the long run, genuine, verifiable insight into the real people, real families, and real societies that existed long before legend and poetry transformed them into something larger than life. The golden masks Schliemann uncovered back in 1876 are not Agamemnon's face, but they do belong to real people, members of an actual family dynasty who ruled over Mycenae many centuries ago, whose blood relationships we can now confirm through modern genetic science in ways 19th century archaeology alone could never have achieved. Their world of golden citadels, powerful ruling families, and interconnected Aegean civilizations was genuinely real. And it was precisely this real world that eventually gave rise to one of the most enduring stories ever told. Somewhere beneath the ruins of Mycenae, within royal shaft graves first uncovered nearly a century and a half ago, and now finally understood through the careful, patient work of modern ancient DNA research, lies the real family behind the age of heroes. Not the legendary figures memorialized within Homer's poetry, but the actual historically confirmed dynasty whose genuine power, wealth, and bloodline first inspired the legend that would eventually echo across nearly 3,000 years of human storytelling.